Hey friends, and welcome back to Path of Exile, Legacy of Phrecia League for the latest build I've been working on. And this one is a Herald of Thunder and Ball Lightning of Orbiting build. So we went Surfcaster on this one, and we went Surfcaster for the 100% chance to crit. So if we open up our Ascendancy, this node here is really what we're focusing on, and all hits are critical strikes while holding a fishing rod. This is particularly good when you combine it with Herald of Thunder, because Herald of Thunder has no innate crit chance. It's actually really hard to get Herald of Thunder to consistently crit. There are a couple of variations of this build, which are focusing entirely on Herald of Thunder. I wanted to take a bit of a different route because I wanted to include things like Discipline and Grace. So we are not going the traditional all damage all the time Herald of Thunder route. We're instead going with a hybrid of Herald of Thunder and Ball Lightning of Orbiting, so that we can introduce all of these other aspects. So for this build, we went with a defense mix of Chaos Inoculation and Ghost Dance with lots of evasion and lots of ES. I say lots, lots being relative. So we have 4,000 ES and 11,000 evasion without any of our flasks going. And our flasks should be up pretty consistently because they're gaining tons of charges from critical strikes, and we have gained critical strike, or gained flask charge on critical strike on our belt. So we should have a pretty good flask uptime. We've got a little bit of suppress, and other than that, we're focusing on cold damage, increased damage while we're chilling things and freezing things, and yeah, that's about it. So we've got Enduring Composure, so we should always have 3 endurance charges. And for damage, we're going with a mix of Sadist and Heat Shiver and the Taming. Now the reason we're doing this is the Surfcaster allows us to convert our lightning damage to cold damage. So our Herald of Thunder is now dealing cold damage. My cold damage can shock. My cold damage is also going to be chilling and freezing. And with Heat Shiver, our cold damage gives us fire damage per chill effect and if they're frozen. So we are effectively able to deal chill, shock, freeze, and ignite all at the same time. And so the Taming is a particularly powerful ring for us. On the same note, the reason that we want to have Sadist as many places as we can find it is because we're getting a huge amount of increased elemental damage because we are chill, shock, and igniting things very often. So we should always meet the criteria for 60% increased elemental damage. And then the last thing I wanted to focus on, early on in this character, we were using Herald of Ice. We took Herald of Ice out for a couple of reasons. Number one, Herald of Ice became 2 mana expensive, so the reservation for Herald of Ice is pretty significant, and the more we increased our desire for clarity and discipline and grace, as well as 5-linking our Herald of Thunder, the less viable supporting Herald of Ice was. So whenever we could, we switched out Herald of Ice for Oriath's End, which allowed us to unspec Charisma and go for a more damage focused setup up here. And then Oriath's End is taking care of all of our clear. Other than that, we have a pretty basic evasion ES setup. We have evasion ES on our chest piece. This chest piece can be a lot better, but this is what we got. And then we have pure energy shield, gloves, and boots. And this is to make up for the energy shield that we would be getting from a good helmet. Now, the reason we went with Heat Shiver instead of a really good helmet is because of the damage potential of a Heat Shiver. Even though the defensive potential from 100% increased energy shield from equipped helmet mastery is really good, I wanted to take this route because it made the build as a whole feel much, much better. Now, we've covered all of that. There are some issues with the build, and it is pretty significant, and it has to do a lot with a couple of things. Number one, Herald of Thunder is pretty hard to scale no matter how you do it. So if you go with a pure crit build, that's fine. but having a fishing rod means you can only get cast speed, which means you're missing out on any source of increased levels on lightning skill gems from weapons like we would normally have. Or you're missing out on uniques like Annihilating Light, which increase your damage. The other part of this is because we're going crit, the only amulet that really makes sense is Meriline's Fallacy. This is a really good amulet, but it means once more we're missing out on any gem levels. And then lastly, the defensive layers that we chose to go with mean that we're using a rare chest piece instead of a unique. A unique chest piece would afford us much less in the way of defenses, but would allow us to do things like increase the level of our Herald of Thunder. All that being said is all of the choices that we made have limited the damage potential of this build pretty significantly, but I still really enjoy it, and I've got a fight with the Maven that I'll be showing in the background while I'm talking about this, but I'm really enjoying it. Now, last up is how we're scaling the damage, and it's crit multi. Of course it's crit multi. So we have tons of crit multi all over the place, as well as some max ES wherever we can get it. And the last thing we wanted to focus on is getting our freeze duration up. Alright, so switching over to POV, this is what we've got going on here, and Herald of Thunder on its own has somewhere in the realm of 1.3 million DPS. Now, something of note is that is with 10 seconds of chill, but they are not frozen and they have 0 seconds of freeze. The damage potential in these two columns are pretty significant, so we'll get back to that. The reason that we wanted to focus so hard on freeze duration is for the ailment threshold. So right now we have an 8.6 million ailment threshold, which is how much ailment threshold we can get to apply a minimum freeze. So what that means is anything with an ailment threshold higher than 8.6 million will effectively not be able to be frozen by us. I believe 8.6 million is enough to freeze any bosses that are not Ubers. The problem with Ubers is once you go into Ubers, they get a less damage taken modification. So 70% less to enemy damage taken is significant. It means that our damage is reduced pretty heavily, but our damage is also what contributes to the freeze ailment threshold. So this drops all the way to 2.6 million, which means that we effectively won't be able to freeze any Ubers. And I don't think it's worth investing enough into this to try to do that. So right now, these can never be applied to Ubers, and it's okay. For anything else, I believe we're high enough to be able to do this, so if we freeze an enemy, we get an instant boost of around 300k DPS on just Herald of Thunder, and just under 1 million for our full DPS, and that's Ball Lightning of Orbiting doing a ton of damage there. If we have 10 seconds of freeze on an enemy, which is the max we can get for this damage bonus, that is a huge bonus in damage. It's 500,000, I think, for just Herald of Thunder. And it is 1.2 million for our full DPS. If we have both true at the same time, we're up to 2.2 million for Herald of Thunder and 5.7 million total. So, freeze is important. Don't neglect your ability to freeze on this build. But yeah, that's pretty much how the build works. It feels pretty tanky while mapping. There are a couple of things that can still one-shot us, and there's plenty that just needs us to be able to hit things, so running into things like invulnerability auras is very painful, because a lot of our recovery is dependent on this Watcher's Eye here, which is gain ES while per enemy hit, and then we also have some instant leech. And if we can't deal damage, we're not going to be able to stay alive effectively, because we can recharge ES while we're being hit. So we have that going on. We have a little bit of ES regen, but it's not nearly enough to stand in the middle of a pack. And then last, for our just feels good for the build, we're using casting damage taken level 1 with level 10 steel skin, ball lightning of static, and a frost bomb. Frost bomb is going to be applying exposure, which we already apply with our gloves, so not a big deal. But more importantly, it reduces life regen rate for any really annoying monsters that pop up that have a ton of regen. Ball lightning of static is really just there to provide us with a good way of getting a bunch of hits in. But throwing ball lightning of static down with our casting damage taken means that we're going to be critting stuff a lot and gaining a bunch of ES regen. This does two things. This is both a source of flask charges and a source of ES recovery, because every time we hit something we're gaining ES. So that's why that's there. And then we also have Arcanist brand with essence, elemental weakness, and frostbite. Now you might be wondering why we're doing this. Arcanist brand is going to cast these and at some rate. The reason we have this set up like this is number 1 for mana cost, and number 2 so that we can include enhance on the frostbite and ally weakness. This is very important because the quality of frostbite and elemental weakness have to do with the duration of freezes or elemental ailments on cursed enemies. And this is where a huge amount of our freeze duration comes from, which is what we were talking about earlier with the ailment threshold. So we have both of these curses qualityed up to 20, and we have a level 4 enhance sitting on our Arcanist brand, which means we're getting a ton of usage out of this increased duration from our freeze. So very important things here. Cannot forget these. And then last up we have our auras, which is discipline, grace, and clarity with enlighten. Clarity is only level 10. I'm adjusting this based on how much mana I feel like I need. Now again, if you wanted to make a more Herald of Thunder focused build, you could do that. There are plenty of those on PoE Ninja. They hit something like 15 million or probably 20-ish million DPS, so they're very effective, but they do have an issue of being very squishy. And I think that does it. So yeah, that's the concept for the build. I had a lot of fun building this one. This is one that I wanted to build as soon as the Surfcaster came out. So I enjoyed building this a great deal. So hopefully you liked this video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this build and what your favorite build of Legacy of Phrecia has been. Also, check out the description for a link to my Discord. Right now it's pretty sparse, but we like to talk about game mechanics and MTX and what's coming up in PoE. And then lastly, very soon we're going to go back to PoE 2 for the 0.2 update for PoE 2, and hopefully they've got some juicy things to reveal to us. That reveal is going on today as of recording. Don't know when I'm going to put this video out, but hopefully there are some nice details there and some interesting builds that we can make. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.